What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another edition of Sit Down Saturday. I heard you loud and clear, and I wanted to do it anyway, so we're going to be doing a comparison of these two guys today. These sorts of videos are always lengthy and labor-intensive on my end to do, so we're not going to waste a whole lot of time in the beginning. Couple things I got to sort out, though, first for house cleaning. Number one, I put the skis on backwards for this review on Bumblebee, but I'm only going to take half responsibility for it, and I'm going to tell you why. Because the ski should be sitting the other way on this blue piece. Like, the front of the ski should be slicing through the water and then shooting out the water kind of behind it. So I think, in my opinion, that I'm only going to take half responsibility for that. So that was just a quick one. Secondly, the how much is too much, how fast is too fast in regards to Star Wars films. Fair amount of comments saying that they think that the low ticket sales had a lot to do with The Last Jedi reception. I'm here to tell you that there's no evidence to suggest that in any other place. So that doesn't make any sense to me. Everything else performed well around it. So for one thing that happened to also be very poorly promoted, marketed, etc. to perform poorly, it's much more likely that it had something to do with something else as opposed to every other Star Wars thing which continued to gain financial success. I've got an end game with this Star Wars stuff and we're gonna get there, but I have to continue to kind of test the waters, and the moment that I think that we're ready to dig in deep, we're gonna dig in deep. But for right now, just bear with me. Lastly, our Unicron update for the week. Shout out once again to Brian Brink of Breaking the Mold and Enter the Realm, both on the Cool Table Network. So I'm getting this video done pretty early this week. So this was Monday, so things may have changed. It's quite possible that things would have changed. But we did have a stagnant area, but it is already once again on the incline. So nothing super exciting. Everything is pretty much on course, but it is also slightly a fair way to go. There's one thing that's worth noting. The increase in the barge happened after it got funded. Then there was a dramatic increase. If this goes the way it goes, it may not have the time to get that dramatic increase. So that's what raised the barge to 8,000. That's what the mark is that this needs to meet. So it's gonna be touch and go. And with that, I think we can hop right into this. I really wanted to do this because there are things about each of these that I wanted to comment on. I commented more on it on Patreon, but I got into like the woods a little bit as far as like some of the things I think about X-Transbots that is on Patreon if you're interested. That's where that's at. But there's things that I wanted to see how it related to try to be objective and look at it. Obviously, some of this stuff is going to be subjective. I do the best I can. That being said, let's get started.
And we start with accessories. So I think it's no surprise to any that X-Transbots smashes Fanstoys in this department, as they included a metric ton of accessories with this figure. The skis, the ski-related accessories, the sand stuff with the shovel and the bucket and the beach ball, and on top of that they included the pistol, the water effects for underneath the boat, extra face options, head options, plus the added gimmick of the arm elements, whereas Fanstoys gave you 3 guns and some head options. You could maybe consider the 4-arm guns a gimmick, but I don't think I would. So X-Transbots smashes them right out of the gate in pretty much everything.
Let's move on to our build and materials. Both of these products feel great. Both of them utilize strong to decent plastics as well as die cast. However, the consistency regarding the joints is much stronger in the Fanstoys than it is in the X-Transbots. Also, the joint tolerances are not only more consistent but better executed in the Fanstoys than they are in the X-Transbots. So for materials, I'm giving it a tie. For build quality, I'm giving it to Fanstoys. Now, in regard to hardware, once again, they're about equal. They both utilize tension universals when they can, pinned hinges where they can. Neither of them utilize any sort of ratcheting system. And now let's move it into sculpt and paint. Looking at them both initially from a front view, of which I'll go ahead and correct just to make sure it's dead on. I think they're both sculpted well, but I think the X-Transbots is far more successful at what it's trying to do. I don't think it's fair to suggest that Fanstoys isn't trying to have some sort of tip of the hat to the cartoon model, because most of their products tip their hat that direction. So I think it would be unreasonable to suggest that all of a sudden their intention was to go left. So in that regard, I think the X-Transbots edges edges out the Fanstoys. However, I do think that the proportions on the Fanstoys are better executed between the arms, torso, and legs. Now let's move in piece by piece. The X-Transbots head, face, and eyes are painted, whereas the Fanstoys only has the face and eyes. I do also think that the faceplate and eye section of the X-Transbots is more accurate and has more character, whereas the Fanstoys one does seem a little dead to me. I do like the sculpt work in the Fanstoys along the yellow ridges that house the propellers. I find it to be more intricate and more interesting to look at. I also think that the neck area of the Fanstoys looks cleaner and more purposeful than the X-Transbot. And the X-Transbots has the two fins that stick out on the side, which only serves the real purpose of hiding a lack of cleanliness in the shoulders. The propellers themselves are painted on the X-Transbots with a nice gloss coat, which do look nice. And I like on the top of the fins, which you may not be able to see, but the bar between the two propellers has some sculpted details on the X-Transbots where it does not on the Fanstoys. In terms of the chest, torso, abdomen area, the X-Transbots is definitely more cartoon accurate. It has the dumpy, elongated look that goes hand in hand with the character design on the Sunbow chart. It also has a ton of white paint and yellow paint, as well as the light blue translucents. Whereas the Fanstoys has a much more heroic proportion, has white paint, blue paint, yellow paint, and red paint, but still probably not as much paint in total quantity as the X-Transbots. They're both sculpted well. They both have a fair amount of detail on. I should also mention that the X-Transbots has some silver paint on it as well. From the side, I think both are pretty clean. Both have visible white paint, but I think if I had to choose a winner in regard to who executes it in the most cleanly manner, I'd have to give it to the X-Transbots. In regard to the arms, the X-Transbots has the fully painted blue arm, where the Fanstoys has the straight plastic arm. The X-Transbots has a nice blue metallic paint that pops on this figure like an overheated corn kernel. Sculpt-wise though, I think they're both equally well done. I like the little circle patterns in the shoulder of the Fanstoys. I also really like all the bolt details and panel details in the X-Transbots. The hips, upper thighs, and pelvis area are actually the elements of both of these figures that I feel like could use some improvement. The clear separation between waistline and upper thigh element of the Fanstoys is a turnoff. The disproportionately thin pelvis in terms of width in regard to the upper body and lower body on the X-Transbots is equally a turnoff. They both have the unsightly metal pins going through the middle of them, the hips that is, but the X-Transbots has more paint. You can make the argument that the X-Transbots is cleaner. I can make the argument that there's more intricate detail in the sculpt of the Fanstoys. Once again, an element of both of these figures that I don't think works very well, which is the side of the upper leg. I like the extra sculpted work in the Fanstoys. I like the girth, so to speak, in depth, so to speak, of the X-Transbots. Also, the X-Transbots has the fully painted yellow. Looking at the lower legs, from the front, of course, the X-Transbots has tons of paint with their blue metallic as well as their yellow, the dark blue translucent, whereas the Fanstoys has no paint and the blue translucent. Sculpt work, I think both are good, but I might prefer the circle with the crosshairs on the X-Transbots with the two lines than I do that of the wedged out vents in plain circle of the Fanstoys. From the side, Seaspray always suffers from big foot disease, but due to the lack of depth and width in the lower calf of the Fanstoys, it's far more disproportionate than that of the X-Transbots. The X-Transbots also, as previously stated, has the metallic paint and yellow paint working highly in its favor. In the same breath, you can also say that while both have sculpted detail, there's a lot more of the engineering components visible on the X-Transbots. Looking at them from the back, I don't think either of them is especially attractive. However, I'd have to give it to the X-Transbots in the sense of cleanliness and hiding engineering components. Plus, all of the aforementioned paint still comes through.
So in terms of sculpt and paint, X-Transbots takes the clear lead. They beat out Fanstoys in every category with the exception of the hips where they tie. And the truth is, most of this has to do with paint. Sculpt-wise, they're tied in a lot more departments. But the X-Transbots figure is just so beautifully painted that it ends up making the Fanstoys figure look more like a plane than a boat. Am I right? That is, of course, if you can stomach the metallic paint, of which I can, and I think it's done beautifully.
Going through articulation, Fanstoys' head is on a ball peg. It swivels, you get a little bit down and a little bit up. Neptune is on a hinge swivel, which I think is far more advantageous. You get more up, more down, and the swivel. Fanstoys shoulder is on a universal. You get all the way up almost. You get the swivel. That's it. For Neptune, also a universal, but the pegging system is far small and does throw off proportions for me. That being said, you get 90 degrees out, you get the full swivel, and because of the double hinge, but also doesn't clean up perfectly, but you do get a butterfly, a great deal back and a little bit forward. Fanstoys, full bicep swivel. X-Transbots, full bicep swivel. Fanstoys, double hinged elbow. X-Transbots, double hinged elbow. Same range, but I like this joint better. Fanstoys, wrist swivel, fingers on a base pin knuckle, all on the same pin. X-Transbots, exactly the same. Fanstoys, waist swivel, slight ab crunch. X-Transbots, waist swivel, full ab crunch forward and back. Fanstoys, universal hips, great range out to the side and forward. X-Transbots, universal hips, full range out to the side and forward. Thigh swivel, thigh swivel. Fanstoys, double hinge knee for the full range. X-Transbots, single hinge knee, slightly short of the full range. Fanstoys, no ankle tilt up, good ankle tilt down with a limited rocker. X-Transbots, ankle tilt up, limited ankle tilt down with a full rocker.
So when the smoke settles, they tie in most departments. Shoulders, bicep, elbow, wrist, hands, hips, thighs. The shoulders have to be a tie because Fanstoys has more range vertically. X-Transbots has the butterfly. But X-Transbots edges them out in the head, torso, and ankles, where Fanstoys only takes the lead in the knees.
In terms of comparing it to the Sunbow model, the X-Transbots is far more faithful conceptually than the Fanstoys will ever dream to be. There are plenty of details that the X-Transbots really made sure they hit. The little carve-out notch in the side of the yellow fins that sit beside his head, the circle and square notches in the shoulder, the circle on the knees, etc. The Fanstoys has a few of those components, however, proportionately, the X-Transbots is far closer. In the same breath, the X-Transbots is a far cry from this as well. Much to my delight, actually, because the X-Transbots isn't quite as dumpy as the cartoon model, and the shoulders sit far more closer to the head on the X-Transbots than they do in the cartoon model. The one thing that Fanstoys got is the cut line design of the feet. The angles are closer in the Fanstoys than they are in the X-Transbots, but the X-Transbots' size in terms of their feet are closer than the Fanstoys. So neither are really accurate, but even that being said, it's easy to see that the X-Transbots is far closer. In comparing scale, it gets tricky. Now, what I've used is 2 third-party offerings, as well as 2 official offerings, to try and speak about the correct scale here the best we can. Let me go ahead and say this as a precursor before we get started. I honestly think that either one is ultimately fine in regards to scale. Both, I think you can easily explain away. That being said, if we look at this picture, Seaspray's head comes up to the shoulders of Powerglide, which is pretty much on point with the Fanstoys model. However, in the X-Transbots model, he's taller. Now, he's about half a head taller than Beachcomber. He's about a full head taller than X-Transbots' own Beachcomber. So I think the X-Transbots scale is just off. That being said, the Fanstoys scale is pretty much dead on. Now, let's compare it to the official offerings. The red line comes through the top of the chest of Seaspray to the middle of the hood of Smokescreen, in the middle of the chest of Trax. Now, the cartoon model of Smokescreen is different than the official, so if we also look, the head comes up to about the middle of the bicep, and what it basically ends up equating to is that the top of the yellow hood over Seaspray comes up to the top of the head of Smokescreen, the bottom of the head of Trax, which makes it closer to scale with the official offerings, and the Fanstoys one is too small. So it's obviously a wash here. The Fanstoys one is too small for the official offerings, yet fits in well with the third-party offerings. The X-Transbots fits in well with the official offerings, but it's too big for the third-party offerings, including its own toy from its own line. So I think this pretty much has to be seen as a tie.
Transformation-wise, it once again has to go to X-Transbots. While there is a frustrating piece during the sequence of the X-Transbots in regard to dealing with those two panels that have to fold in towards one another in the center of the chest, the majority of the transformation goes very smoothly. Specifically the legs, the center of the chest, the bump out on the chest, the arms, the head, all of that stuff is issue-free. Whereas, unfortunately, this is never Fanstoys' strong suit, but the only part of their transformation that's sort of intuitive and fun are the arms and the legs. And the entire midsection is extremely frustrating, far more frustrating than the frustrating elements that are a part of the X-Transbots. In regard to alt mode, it's tough. So it's tough to stay objective. On one hand, let me say this, my personal preference is the X-Transbots. However, if we're giving some cartoon points, I think that the Fanstoys is closer to the cartoon model. I just don't like that look. So this is one of those things where bias definitely plays a part. But if I'm playing by the rules that we've been judging everything else, I'd probably have to give it to Fanstoys, even though I think the X-Transbots alt mode looks better because I think they went with a more realistic approach. Neither of them, to be fair, look bad.
And now it brings us to our unbiased opinion. My oldest daughter, Jaina, do you have a preference as to which of these is better?
No.
Which one do you think looks better?
The one on the right.
This one.
Yes.
And which one do you think feels better?
Okay. The one on the left.
You think this one feels better?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, now I have my daughter Selena with me. I had to have her leave the room so she wasn't influenced by anyone else before I asked this question. So, Selena, do you care which one of these is better?
No.
Okay. Which one do you think looks better?
Big size.
This one? Okay. Which one do you think feels better?
Mostly this one.
Okay. Thank you.
Welcome.
Which brings us to our final scoring. There's one thing I need to comment on straight away, and that is, in terms of the alt mode, what I ended up doing was tying them out for alt mode because I think the X-Transbots look so much better than the Fanstoys, but the Fanstoys is more accurate, so for accuracy, I tied them out as well. Otherwise, I would have had to have given one to one and one to the other, and I just am going to be able to sleep better at night if I just tie them both because I just can't give credit for that boat mode when I prefer the X-Transbots so much. They tie in other categories like materials, hardware, and scale, but X-Transbots takes the lead in accessories, gimmicks, articulation, sculpt, paint, which is surprising, transformation, and even in price as it was $4 cheaper. Fanstoys only is able to edge them out in build because it is, at least in the two that I have, a better built figure. Which brings us to our final score and our final ranking, and that is X-Transbots with 8-1, which is the biggest example of one company just washing another that we've seen on this channel in regard to these versus videos to date.
It was a firefight! Bloodbath. So yeah, this is a really good figure. This is probably the second best figure that X-Transbots has ever produced. The first one being Klaatu, their Cosmos. So yeah, it should have won. I'm glad that it did. This is not as good. And to be fair, this is one of Fanstoys' weaker releases in general. But Fanstoys is now 1 for 3, right? 1 win, 2 losses. Must be all my Fanstoys bias. Anyway, I'll see you guys soon. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Until next time, take care.